Hey, what's up, future music friends? This is Luca Pretolesi here at Studio DMI in Las Vegas. Welcome to the studio.
Too original for them party. Them frightened all through them saw me.
Working with Major Lazer is always fun. After many records, couple of albums, even production for other artists. We did Snoop Lion together and other records. It's interesting to see how the combination of different sounds, different culture, and different style of music can really work together. But now my job is a little challenging because I need to mix this together. So the mix down process of this song today to original, it's not an exception. It's a big room song, 128, with dancehall sound, effects, crazy arrangement, put all together. So I'll be happy to show you a little bit more the way I approach from the real beginning of this mix. The entire studio is based on a hybrid setup. It's a mastering console with mixing and mastering gear in one place, on the sweet spot. Stereo bus process in the middle, mixing on the left, mastering on the right. Very straightforward. Logic is my DAW, and the SSL Sigma is my summing device. And as far as mastering, I choose Prism for the sound because I know so well and I know how much I can push.
Original for them party. Them frightened all through them saw me.
When I received the stems from Diplo for this track, I realized there was a lot of cool materials there, but little lost in the mix. And the rough had a weird low end keep going through the old tracks. It was like some sub frequencies, almost like a steady sound that to me was kind of pushing the mix down a little bit. And my approach was to make the low end right from the beginning, specifically on the kick drum, and have everything groove around that part. So I have other percussions just feel right, sit on the kick, and eventually the rest of the song. On the rough that I'll play for you, there's almost like a long 808 keep going that you can hear here. And after the mix, I turn it more this way. Instead of, the concept for me was, okay, let's take one of the elements of the kick, let's mix an enhancement of movement with sidechain, but let's get rid of all the low end that we don't need and just keep what we really need. So checking the stems and specifically on the kick drum, I realized there was one part, kind of like a sub low end kick, that was lost, and I did some EQing and cleaning this part using a little bit of distortion, get rid of the tail of the kick, and some extreme EQing and a normal compression, and just give this more space on the mix. Check it out. Without, I feel we have a lot of body but not much movement. That was kind of like my idea as far as the kick drum. The overall drum mix of this track is divided on 4 buses. That's the way it's not only inside of Logic, but also outside of Logic, hitting my summing device and outboard gear. And almost like opposite of a pop song where you try to glue all the drums together, or like an R&B track or something you try to have a solid sound. My point on this, I want to have a lot of separation where the hi-hat, the snare, all the percussion, they have the really own space. The only things I want to glue together really well was the kick and the long 808 that we decide actually to give some movement, some groove. Clap and snare, they're not traditional. They're hit on with a kick and I decide to find a space for the clap and the snare to cover very distinct frequency area. So check it out. This is the clap EQ, this is the snare EQ. Essentially, they're gonna cover the opposite space. And in some way, they just move together with the kick. Let me play just the drum side of this. Use distortion on the clap. Just give to me a little bit of color. I like to blend together, so to parallel a little bit, to give a little bit of distortion, saturation on the top, and just blend with a clean one. I'm a huge fan of dynamic EQ, especially using on high percussion, ride, crash, anything that has like a movement and a clear space to cover. And I use, in some way, similar to a multi-bus compressor, but it's cleaner, it's more precise to me. And the dynamic EQ, in this case, I was trying to kind of like shape the top, don't have too much artificial and too much harshness over 10K, and give a little bit of pumping on the mid-low frequency on that area. Check it out. As far as the outboard gear on the percussion, I used my old 1978 Rasmus piece of console. It's a sidecar, that's the way we call it. And it's a 4-channel that has a very distinctive sound. It's almost a natural compression. With overloading a little bit the input, I'm able to push drums and just get a little bit this natural clipping, almost breaking, but on the sweet spot, not going total distortion. Let me show this piece of gear. This is the Rasmus 4-channel sidecar. So we used to have a 20-channel mixer based on this console, which is a 1978 console, very unique because back then it was like probably $30,000 in the late 70s, used by Nirvana for the first album. Very raw, very aggressive, not the best sounding piece of gear to treat vocal or reverb, but for drums, that's my sound. And we used to mix on this console, again, 20 channel. I always find myself to use 4 or 6 maximum, so we cut it. And we make this little guy with a nice recap and new power supply. And what I do, mostly I just treat my bus, and I divide on 2 bus, the high percussion and the low percussion. And I use, the main part of this to me is the initial gain. So the gain, how it get into on this console, it's very unique because it has a saturation, they never breaks. You give almost like a natural compression. And the frequency on the EQ, which is a very simple EQ, it just allows me to control what part I want to get saturation. And let me play for you what these 4 channels are doing right now. So essentially is, okay, clap and snare. My point is always to take away the digital part when you treat clap in the box, so the harshness in some way, and give a little bit of body. So that's a clap that I don't like, that's a clap that I like. And this pretty much the opposite way around, top end, mid frequency and body, EQ, and this feedback into the Sigma and mix and blend with the rest on the console. There we go. Bass line and synth on this track, they're kind of unique because the bass line to me has a vibe of, I can see a bass player on stage actually. So almost like a real bass. And there's like trumpet. Again, it's like a real trumpet with some chop and editing that they probably did. And some lead synths, they're super digital. So I was trying to give a clear space between those parts. And the trumpet is the one that I want to find a way to just move around the mix a little bit, but not fully auto panning. So what I did, it's using a combination of Saturn and the Melda multi-band auto pan, which is kind of unique to me. It's kind of cool because you can do auto panning on certain bands and just leave certain frequency areas really center, right? So the trumpet sound that it's kind of like the lead sound for the entire track has this like kind of little saturation that I decided to give, which is this. This kind of like mid-rangey and adding the panning. So to get everything, it's kind of like center and narrow and fighting with the bass, I think. And then when saturation and panning is moving, it will be around. And then on the second part of the trumpet, looking with the bass, and you can see here, the bass is the one that has the thick line. So the bass, it's very clear, it's covering that area. It has a peak, it's an E, so it's like those 80 hertz that absolutely don't want to have any crossover point on this area with the trumpet. And now the bass is right in the middle, and the trumpet, after a K, it starts to move around. And even if I check mono, I still have a clear bass in the center, and I even have a little bit of trumpet in mono. And I check the side, the bass is gone, and I have a little bit of the trumpet. As far as the synth in general, there is a different scene to me on the track. One is the verse with the hook, and the other one is the drop. They're very different. So it's almost the hook, it's almost like a building part into the drop. And all these synths that are happening on the drop, I want to have this super clean, in your face. There is a multiple synths to achieve this, and there is a combination of side chaining on certain synth, just transient on others. And that actually was a great idea on the production side of this mix. I had some editing, I know it's a production, it's almost an additional production work for me, but it was a way to create space, let the compressor breathe a little bit before the drop. And the guys at Major Lazer, they love it, so we keep it this way. And check the combination of the lead synth. So the main one essentially, it's tiny bit wider than normal. Will be like delay on the top frequency, they usually do a lot. Little bit of saturation. Again, why? It's parallel, so it's not full saturation. It just enhance some area and some harmonics. Check it out. Bring low-level information up on the mix. And the LFO tools, they just take a space for the kick and the bass to hit. I don't need to have an extra frequency on top of that area, so I left that part open. I had another parallel on this part that was to give a little bit of body. And then this is really, really smart actually. This is like a transient part. Only those parts. And add in this. full song. As far as the horns, they're like kind of like the main part of this mix. As far as like taking the almost a dancehall vibe, I had to use a piece of gear that most of the time I use on kick drums, which is the Neotech. That in this case, I cannot find nothing better than this. And I used in the past exactly the same for the same purpose on an old Snoop Lion song, and I like the sound that has this like horn, and I kind of like replicate the same on this track. So I had tiny bit of this tape echo that I like so much from UAD, and the famous DBX 160, the 160, that as to me, more than a compressor, it's a tone type of effect. Check it out. Bring the top, bring the trends in the top of the attack a little bit up. Echo, compression. I love the new Logic compressor here so much. And when you bypass this guy, the life goes away. And then if you bypass the entire chain plus this with a mix, so low end and kind of like mid-tone, thick sound from the Neotech is very, very effective on this sound to me. Let me show you a little bit more about piano on this track. The track has a very cool, unique piano that I decide to just don't touch it, just leave it like that. They find a sample somewhere, think Diplo Blender, somebody at the team would find this cool piano. Gives so much character to the mix. And what I did is pretty much leave it like that. The only things I actually add is a little bit of automation to have this built-in part, especially when you hear the mix. Come on. And pretty much every time on this track, the story is there's always this build-up before the drop where I want the compressor to breathe. So there's this point where I try to take away some parts and just have compressor reset and just hit. So in general, all the piano, all the like more old sounds, they have a very gentle approach, not overmix something that already has the right sound. You're gonna see a lot of automations, and people say, why you do these automations? Because I'm sending all this track to analog gear, so I don't want to send empty parts to bring noise up on the mix. So I try to keep a mix very clean. That's why you see all this automation through the mix. Vocal on this track, it's a combination of 3 vocals. There's an elephant that she has this very characteristic, unique tone, Jovi, and actual piece of live audio from Major Lazer show the Walsh of Fire did on the intro. So those are kind of like the vocal element on the track. Once again, I didn't over process too much, but I decided to do some parallel processing and add a little bit of tape delay, a little bit of color, and just have the vocal float and just move around the mix. Versus we have other instruments that are very punchy and very defined on the mix. I want to have the vocal to just go, again, kind of like float around the mix. So checking Jovi that I did a little bit of this parallel processing.
Too original for them party. Too original for them party.
So there is a one clean parts that has retained pretty much the initial approach, but adding with API vision from UAD, that's pretty crazy the way you can get rid of the top end that you don't like, and I kind of like made that first layer of vocal warm, pushing the gain, and the way it's reacting, it's very similar to analog gear, where you start to saturate at one point. So that's kind of like the vocal. Second vocal, it does this. He has this kind of like, that was, I was talking about floating around the mix, was this part. And that's the part that Jovi does. And then we have a verse. The verse, it's very different. See me rocking now, going tribal style. Dance like a chicken, flap tiger wild. Flap tiger wild. There's nothing better than Tube Tech CL1B. And I think it's Baba Juice make a goddamn strong. See me rocking now, going tribal style. Dance like a chicken, flap tiger wild. Flap tiger wild. Baba Juice make a goddamn strong. Compression. Baba Juice make a goddamn strong. See me rocking now, going tribal style. Dance like a chicken. Add a little bit of color of the Neve 31102, which is, to me, I'm never going to use actually as an EQ. To me, it's more like a tone type of EQ. And in this case, the Alicia really worked well. Bring mid-low frequency up. The verse, the chorus, all the vocal actually, they're coming through a bus, and I use the Charter compressor. That it's a glue machine for the vocal. It's not really glue with the entire mix, but between the vocals, you just keep the vocal together really well. Make a goddamn strong. See me rocking now, going tribal style. Dance like a chicken, flap tiger wild. So the mix. Kind of like low. I lose a little bit of the. I lose a bit of transient. Bring up now. Vocal hook, it's super cool, this part. There is some effects. Once again, I decide to use my parallel chain for this. It's a combination of two delay. The tape, the J37 from Waves have this like cool saturation. I'm adding a little bit of mono delay. Parallel with a clean one. There we go. The vocal, once again, has a lot of pieces that they cover different area. From the intro to these little drops that we have here. There is one part that I kind of like treat as almost like a sample. This part here. Dance like a chicken flap tiger wild. 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 Do like a kind of flanger. They move a little bit on the side. Dance like a chicken flap tiger wild. Dance like a chicken flap tiger wild. Dance like a chicken flap tiger wild. And those are the vocal for Major Lazer 2 Original. The mastering stage on this track is actually very, very important. Once again, a lot low end, so I don't want to change on mastering the groove that I had on the mix. The mastering in this case was more to refine and just make everything sounds right, loud, but no over process. No, I don't want to hear over compression, over limiting on this track. So as usual, when I have the luxury to do mastering on my own mix, it's a final stage of my mix. Since I mix into a console, I'm able to start to insert my master at the end. I make a decision. I do make a decision in the beginning as far as the level of compression and EQ that I mix into that. So this track actually had a very, very clear idea. I want to have like a slow compression for the first compressor, for the Maslake, to just kind of like give a tone and have a slow attack. You allow me to don't kill the transient and let the track breathe. And that's what I did on this one. And then I have the second compressor doing exactly the opposite. Just do a fast attack. It's a VCA compressor, so it's very fast. and just kind of like compensate between the two. And a stereo bus EQ that I make a decision at the beginning just to give a little bit of clarity, take away information that I don't need. From there, I did my part of mastering. Most of the parts, very important parts actually, is the master EQ. I shave a lot of 22 hertz. I say, why are you doing on the 22 hertz? There's nothing going on in there. Actually, there is stuff there, because when I'm taking the 22, I start to take away a little bit of the 35, the 28, and I take away information that I don't need on the final mix. So this track need to breathe, but I don't need to have low end. They're not necessary. And then I create a little bump when I give back 80 hertz, couple of dBs, to create a little bump on the kick, around the kick and the bass. A little bit of 1K, a little bit of 14K. So, and the music is very transparent, very nice, it's very shine on top. And what I do a little bit of shelf at the beginning of the 1K, and then again a little bit of bump on the 14K to give this kind of like clean but almost bouncing type of sound on the top frequencies. And you can tell how it's never harsh, it's so good. EQ followed by the Bax EQ, that in this case I usually use the Bax filtering when I have something to filter. Again, this mix was so on point as far as that I don't need to do anything as far as high pass, low pass, just a tiny bit. But what I did, I push a lot of this top 18K that, again, it's almost 5 dB, but 5 dB at 18, this means that I'm taking a little bit of the 12, the 14, the 15, and just give a little bit of this crisp but nice top end. A little bit of 300 to give back, and then my analog brick wall limiter that I love so much. It's essentially a way for me to hit the converter with a little bit of clipping, but still retain dynamic and transient. As far as the console, as usually do, I try to keep mono up to 300 hertz, so I don't have nothing going on the low end, and I open tiny bit the stereo width to be a little bit wider. Filter a little bit at the top, and this is the final result on Major Lazer to Original. All right, guys, it was great to have you here in the studio today. I love future music. This is Luca Pretolesi, a Studio DMI. See you next time. Bye-bye.